All right, I'm going to talk about how to set up a multi-track mix session, and this is from the website that should be in the assignment 3, which is the Cambridge website from Mixing Secrets is right here, cambridge.mt. So just copy that link, bring up the website. I found a nice reggae song from there, and let me bring that in here. So show you how I did it. So you would just play this song here. Get my mic a little bit closer. You can play a little bit of the song here. That's the edited excerpt here. And then you're going to want to download this. So this will be a full multi-track zip file. You want the full multi-track zip file. You want to download that and bring that down. And one thing you really want to keep in mind here, one principle, is to just take a peek. So here are the files. I've expanded my zip file. And I'm looking at that in the workspace. So you can open up the workspace without having a Pro Tools session open. And you want to take a peek at the audio files. Here they are. I've navigated to the folder where those files are expanded. You want to take a peek at the audio files just to determine, oh, we have a 44.1 sample rate and a 24-bit bit depth. That's really important to know because you don't want to needlessly convert the sample rate. So let's say we blindly didn't look at that at all. I just made a 48K 24-bit. Well, all these files would have to be converted up, and it doesn't really increase the quality really much at all. And in fact, it's another added step in the conversion of the files that is unnecessary, and you could argue that it might affect the quality a little bit. Maybe you go down in sample rate. Anyhow, the principle here is you want to take a peek at the files here in the workspace browser. That would be Window, New Workspace, default. This window comes up. This is Pro Tools before I launch anything. And now I know, oh, I need a session that's created at 44.1, 24-bit. Now I'm ready to make my session. I'm going to call it my last name. And most of these sessions will be in that format I've discovered. So 44.1, 24-bit, WAV files, interleaved, that should do it, right? So now we're... And sorry if my mic cut out there for a little bit. I'm back now. Now I'm in Pro Tools. Everything's named. I'm ready to start to import the files here. And so I'm gonna do something a little bit strange now too. You don't have to follow. You can just go. Let me go the most straightforward way without getting complicated. I'm just gonna go to File, Import Audio, and then I'm going to navigate to where these files reside. And give me a moment here. I think they're in the documents, and I made it 000. There it is. Here's my files. So I've got my kick file all the way down here. There's 22 files that are all labeled. You do not want to add them here because adding will link to this folder that is outside of my Pro Tools session structure. That's a big no-no. You want to copy. Usually copy or convert. There we go, copy. Now it's going to copy over all these files, put them in my audio files folder. And there's an option here. Usually when we're importing clips and stuff, we want to go to the clip list, right? In this case, new tracks actually makes a lot of sense because we want all the tracks to be labeled kick, snare, guitar, vocals, so on and so forth, because it's just, we're going to just have to drag it in there anyways. And, you know, that's exactly what's going to happen. But that wouldn't work so well if we were dealing with like lots of different loops or like hundreds of audio files that we're importing, for example, because we wouldn't want a new track necessarily out of all those new files. In this case, we're mixing a whole song that's linked up, and we do want a new track. So that makes sense to us. Click OK. It's going to populate all my tracks here. Everything should be labeled. They recorded this quite hot. That's really hot. So you can see the gain structure. I double click on the zoom tool, so it's not being vertically inflated, right? That looks like if I increase the vertical zoom, and if I zoom in, for example, right, it looks like it's clipping. But if I double click on the zoom tool, it puts everything back to default. I can tell by looking at this now that these are very hot levels. I'm gonna have to turn it down quite a bit. Okay, so I'm just kind of taking a survey of these files here. And this whole video is just to kind of get you oriented to start this mixing assignment, right? How do you set up and mix a large multi-track session, right? Well, you could just jump into mixing it, but there's some things, you'd want to do before that are good mixing workflow. So the first thing we can do is start to color code things. And these are logically laid out. Usually you start with a kick drum. That's just kind of a conventional thing. So I'm going to select all of the drum files. So how did I do that? I selected the nameplate. And oftentimes, if you have all the nameplates selected like this, you just option click or alt click if you're on a PC. And then it deselects all of them. But I'm going to grab symbol, holding on the shift key, selects between two tracks, and all these other ones, we'll get to them in a minute. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to color code them. So this little blue bar here, I'm going to select that. I don't really have a preference for drums, but I'm going to select, I don't know, in this case, this nice teal color, right? And we'll look in the mix window. We can see that this button right here, you can see that I'm selecting that. That will make the channel strip in the mix window turn that color, and I can change the saturation here. So I selected all those tracks. I'm starting to color code things. And then I could go ahead and color code the rest of the tracks that are similarly grouped. So I've got a bunch of electric guitars here. Looks like I've got several electric guitars here. Let's color code those. Just kind of organizing my session here. So I'm gonna, I don't know, we'll go orange there. The bass is on its own. So I've got organ left, right, piano, so maybe a keyboard types of tracks. I don't know. Let's make these red. So we're just kind of, color coding everything. And I got to look at the nameplate here. Looks like I got a lead Vox, and then it starts over the kick again, right? I'm using that key command now, command left, right, or control left, right, up, down. Will take me through all the named tracks. So I did the keyboards. Now I got Vox, backing vocal. Cool. So all the remaining tracks are vocal tracks. Make sense? Great. So I'm going to select all those tracks. Let's choose another color. Maybe light green. There we go. Okay, so now I've kind of like color-coded my entire session. And you can do the same thing here in the mix window by clicking on the little area here. Will bring up this color coding window, of course. There we go. Right? And that's just track color coding. So this is great. So I'm starting to color code things. I've started to organize all my sessions, all my similar sounding tracks. And of course, I can just hit play, but I don't know how this is translating over the video capture software, but I'm clipping like crazy right now. So I'm going to go over another principle now called setting up what I call submixes. So submixes allow me to pass, if you've been through my earlier Pro Tools classes, you know what a submix is because we've used them. But if you haven't, submixes are a way to take all the drum tracks, for example, and pass them through an aux input track, right? You should always make a stereo master fader. So let's make a stereo master fader. There we go. And I'll just play a little bit. I don't know how loud it is here, but if I play just a second, I'm clipping like crazy. Super hot signal here. So what I'm going to do now is take all of my similar sounding instruments and I'm going to route them through an aux input track. So there's a couple ways to do that. Let me show you probably the easiest way is to select all those tracks. And again, I just hold on shift, select the first track, select the last track, and I select all of them. Shift select between the tracks. Got it? So now if I do option, let's just option mute. It mutes everything in the session. If I option mute, it solos everything in the session. It's just an example. Now, if I do option shift, it solos just these tracks. So it does something to my selected tracks. So this is where track selection is a very powerful thing in Pro Tools, where you can do similar things. Like I can solo all these tracks. Oops. I can solo all those tracks. I can mute all these tracks. I can record enable all these tracks. So on and so forth. I could add a plugin. I could add a simple EQ plugin, boom, to all these tracks. See that? I could remove the EQ plugin, right? But I'm holding down Alt Shift or Option Shift, right? So in the same way, I'm going to unplug this output here, which is my stereo bus, my console 1, 2, right? And let's just do a little bit of review here. This is the I/O portion. That means input, output. If I just mouse over and leave it there, it'll tell me eventually audio input path selector, just the input. So if we're recording, that's where we select our input, and output, that's where we route the signal to. So we're going to unplug the bottom one here, the output, and we're going to go to a stereo aux input track. So let me show you 2 ways to do that, and I'll do it multiple times. So the first way, I'm holding on the key command. Again, Option does everything, or Option Alt does everything. Option Shift or Alt Shift on a PC does just the selected tracks. So I'm going to remap the output here. I'm going to select just one of these by holding down Option Shift, and I'm going to select New Track. This is probably the simplest way to create that submix. And it says, okay, what do you want to call it? I'm going to call it Drum Bus. And all that's going to do is going to create a stereo aux input, and it's going to call it Drum Bus, but it's also going to do something a little bit sneakier. It's going to make a new bus path called Drum Bus, and it's going to route the signal of all these drum tracks through this one auxiliary track, right? So let's create that. There we go. And for some reason, it puts in the second track. That's okay. And let's make it look nicer with this color here. I'm going to make it a similar color here to these. So let's make it like that. And then I'll just select this one track here, and I'll go a little bit darker. So that's my preferred method. So I have all my tracks here feeding into the submix. And let's just stare at this routing for a moment. We have all the output going drum bus to here, right? So that was a way, going to that new track, I labeled the track. So the track name itself is called Drum Bus, but it's a little bit confusing because it also did this thing behind the scenes called Drum Bus, and that's an actual name. So if I go to the setup and the I/O, that should be in my bus routing here. There it is, Drum Bus. You guys see that? Drum Bus. So when I go to that new track, it makes another virtual connection, like a bus connection. And there's several ways to get signals around in Pro Tools, right? Most self-explanatory. We have an input. It's where we plug in a microphone or some type of external like bus output, like we did in this case. We have the input and output. We have sends, where we could, go out hardware or out a virtual bus path. There's our drum bus again we just created down there. And we have inserts, which are ways that we put the plugins in there just to kind of affect the signal flow. It doesn't really. You could have a hardware I/O too. That's where most of these concepts come from. Our mixing boards, where you'd have hardware inserts, you'd have hardware sends. So we've just kind of virtually modeled all that. Anyhow, the base one doesn't really need one because it's on its own. So you could route it to another track, to an aux input track. Let's just be consistent and do that. So I'm going to do a different way now, just to show you multiple ways. I'm going to go to a stereo aux input track, and it's just called aux track, right? So now I'm going to route that track manually over to my aux track. There we go. So how do I do that? Well, first let's stare at these. So let's just review our other previous example. So all my drum tracks here, I did a new track and went to drum bus, and then it automatically made this auxiliary track here. See, it's an aux track. It has a little icon there. And notice this aux track has no record enable or input only monitoring, because you cannot put audio tracks on auxiliary tracks. Don't believe me? Well, check it out. So here is my simple track here, for example, and I cannot put the audio clip on there. It doesn't work. It will not work. So an aux input track is basically just a aux input that takes signal from somewhere else and passes it through there. So for example, now if I solo this, and let me change my let's just complete this one here. I'm getting a little bit distracted. So I was just reviewing that routing here. So I'm going to do it manually now, and I'm going to use an existing bus path by changing the output here and then patching it in here with the same input. So it's a kind of a mental thing. You have to know how this works. It's going out to bus land, and I'm going to go, let's say bus 3-4. There we go. And I'm just going to solo this track now. And let's put it back to where it was, which I think it was console. Anyhow, let me just complete it. I'm getting a little distracted here. It goes out bus 3-4, which cuts off the signal, and it's going to be in bus 3-4 here, which will pass it through, and we'll hear that. Right? So it's the same thing. Maybe the first method was a little bit easier. There is another solo mode I want to make you guys aware of. Solo mode after fader listen is a great solo mode to have on. So then I could solo this entire drum set. And let me get into where there's more of a beat. It's still clipping there. But if I didn't put that mode on, I wouldn't be able to solo like that. So that's a nice little feature. I gotta label this track here. Bass, bus, right? So, and let's submix our electric guitar tracks. Well, I'm gonna do the same method here. Again, Option does everything. Option Shift does just the selected tracks. And I'm going to expand one of these tracks here, maybe this one right here, and go to New Track. I'm gonna call this GTR bus. Boom. And that's just a little bit faster. And then I might just color code this track here to be like a dark shade of orange, something like that. So now I can solo this. Right? And so I have this whole fader that can control all my guitar tracks. You still need to mix it, but this is really, this whole submixing thing is like a logical signal flow. So let's try this again. I'm going to Command-Shift-N. I'm going to make a stereo aux input. I'm going to do the same method again, which is the manual bus way. And now I have a bunch of keyboard tracks. I'm just going to call them keys, right? And so then I'm going to take the keyboard tracks. Option, we know it does something to everything. Option Shift does just the selected tracks. So I'm just going to change the output here to an available bus path. And look I'm already using bus 3 and 4 for my bass track, and I'm using these other ones that were created. So I'm going to go to bus 5, 6. There we go. So just change those outputs to 5, 6, and then on the input here, I patch it in 5 and 6. And let's see what I got there. Great, that works. And then I'm going to do the last method again. I've got the rest of my vocal tracks here, and I'm going to, again, just getting a little repetitive, but Option does everything. Option Shift does just the selected tracks. And I'm going to Option Shift to the output here and go to New Track. I'm going to call this Vox Bus. And then it makes what? Makes a new track for me. There it is right there. Vox Bus. Boom, Vox Bus. And it made a bus called Vox Bus. And these could be called Bob. These could be called Bus 1, 2. They could be numeric, or they could be, named this way. So honestly, the simpler way is probably just to go to expand this and go to New Track, because that kind of it makes the track for you and it patches it, and it's a little bit faster, more precise. Sometimes I don't like that method, because what happens then is that your I/O gets all customized. It gets custom named, and on a lot of mixing boards, you have a lot of numeric buses that you would use, not these custom names like this. So it's really a kind of a DAW thing. It is a little bit faster and a little bit simpler, but I for years I just did numeric buses, and I did that manual way. And more recently, I've kind of come over to this way and call it drum bus, or I'm doing this new track method. So that kind of works. And so what do we have now? I have the drums. Right, so I can kind of change the value. So this allows me another gain stage to see that, oh, my drums are clipping here. So, I have to bring the level of the drum set down. So this is like a good workflow for mixing. It's great for stems too, which means that, let's say I'd like to render my keyboard stem. Well, I can just right click on this track and go to commit, and it'll render out an audio file to create a stem. That's all good. So So this isn't basic mixing. We still want to, like, change the gain structure. Perhaps with clip, I would probably start with clip gain. For example, like this track is just way too hot, so I'm going to bring it down to more nominal level. I would probably use clip gain. So I got to change the level first, right? I'm going to make the level here kind of more moderate as a better starting point, because these are just really, really heavy levels. You do want the bass to be pretty fat though. And let's see how that sounds. I think it's still clipping though. Right? If this clips, right, Option C or Alt C will clear the clip out, but it's still way too hot. So you still have to manage the gain structure, right? So this at least will get the session set up. So from here, you could start to add some volume information. You could use clip gain. You could start to add pan. And then you could start to add effects processing, such as some equalization. So, we could bring in an EQ here. And you could basically start mixing it, is what I'm saying. So, but I like this workflow of submixing, right? So I just wanted to show you how to find these files, unpack them, get the submixes happening, and get you up and running for mixing. So now we can start to do a raw mix, and this will get you guys started. Because if you guys have, you've been working in DAWs at all, you're making mixes already. So now we're going to get more in depth into this mix process, talking about compression, talking about mixing. So just to review some real basic settings here: options, solo mode, AFL, really good. This XOR mode as well will cancel the solo. So you might want to be on latch mode. So that was options, solo mode, latch, and that you can solo multiple things like that without really deselecting stuff. It'll just kind of keep on selecting the solo, whereas the cancel XOR will cancel the previous solo. See how it's just canceling out all the other ones? So those are two different workflows, and you can override that canceling out by, I believe, shift selecting will cancel that out. So just to show you that solo mode. So the AFL is a very important setting that I've started using more recently, AFL, after fader listen. And what that does is if I solo this, it should, if there's information there, it should pass through that track. So that is a mode of non-destructive soloing. So if I did solo in place, that's destructive, which means that if I solo this now, I don't hear anything because it's cutting off every other one. I've got to solo this as well. I got to solo them both at the same time to do that. So if you do that solo mode, which was the XOR mode, options, excuse me, the solo in place mode right there. If you do that, then you have to command click or control click on this track to let it pass through. So I think a simpler method these days is just to use this mode, solo mode, after fader listen, and it's up to you, whatever your workflow dictates. If you want multiple things to solo, that would be latch, or if you want to cancel the previous solo one at a time, maybe with using the shift to add multiple ones. So I would suggest these solo modes. That's enough information to get started here and start mixing.